Hi, this is Diane Wesley Smith. I want to thank you for joining San Francisco Weekly News. The date today is today is, May the 31st, 2020. The reason I wanted to make sure that I announce the date because this show will have to run we'll have to run it several times because this is the weekend that Los Angeles, first of all, George Floyd was murdered by the police before our eyes, before our very eyes. We saw George Floyd murdered. Last night there were demonstrations and riots in Los Angeles, Washington, St. Paul, Atlanta, Nashville, New York City, and other places. These several cities across the U.S. resembled war zones as crowds defied curfews to protest the death of George Floyd. If you haven't heard of George Floyd, I'm sure that you have by now, but this is a very, very serious matter. It has remained serious for Black people in particular. There's no other race being shot down in the streets, being murdered like dogs, like Black people. Other people do experience racism, but this, folks, this is the epitome of it, and it has never stopped. We've always lived with this danger. We've always been murdered, and there have been no consequences. So I just want to interject. It's great that the officer was charged. We're very surprised. However, he was charged third-degree murder. If you saw the video, how could it be third-degree murder? So we're expecting justice to be served, and but we will not rest until this case is resolved, which should end in the conviction of all four officers who participated in the murder of George Floyd, who spent his last moments pinned under an officer's knee on his neck, begging for his life, shouting through masks, warned to protect themselves from the coronavirus. Thousands poured onto the streets Saturday night and into Sunday, decrying the death of yet another unarmed Black man in police custody. Some were peaceful, denouncing the violence caused by instigators. Let me say right now, be very careful, because instigators are not with us. Instigators are not concerned with justice. Instigators are concerned with instigating. If they can get Black people riled up enough, so to speak, if they can get them if we take our eye off the bouncing ball, they come in and they lead the demonstrations. They start the looting and the protests. And the violence and the mob mentality. We all know the mob mentality. If people are not clear-headed in the heat of the moment, someone yells out something and then everyone goes and does it. So we've got provocateurs. A provocateur is a person that whose actions are designed to undermine the common good, or to undermine the cause, and they do it in such a way that it appears that it is the group, but the provocateur leads the group in the wrong direction. The provocateur, or the provocateurs, because we have many involved in this, what they do is they get people on the wrong track. Okay, as I mentioned, they start the bad action and the misrepresentation of the movement. The movement is about stop the murder right now of Black men. And that is what the movement is. They're mothers against Black sons, called mobs, mothers who have been murdered. You'd be hard pressed to find a Black woman who does not know someone whose child was murdered by the police department. We have black on black crime, and we're dealing with that. But that is not the subject today. The subject today is the constant murdering of black men by the police departments of our nation, and no convictions, nothing justice not being served. Again, some were peaceful. Some of the protests were peaceful, denouncing the violence caused by instigators who hijacked the civil protest. So the civil protest is the protest against the continued murdering of black men, and that was a civil protest, and it was hijacked by instigators or provocateurs. Some launched fireworks and threw bottles at officers. Others torched buildings, burned police cars, and looted stores. And all I'm going to say is I'm still sheltered in place. We've been sheltered in place since March the 10th. So I don't have my normal videos. I could show you, but nevertheless, my point is there are pictures of people throwing bottles and rocks, and they're not black. So what we see is the public mourning. We're mourning. For the past 5 days, thousands of protesters remained civil and never caused any unrest. Many knelt, others chanted, and some carried signs with Floyd's last words, "I can't breathe." There were 3 officers in New York City who looked surprisingly like pigs to me for some reason. I don't know why. But on their shirts, it said, "I can breathe." And that's all I'm going to say about that. One community activist said, while many protesters don't condone violence, nonviolent pleas have gone unnoticed for years. In Atlanta, which saw widespread destruction, looting, and large blazes Friday night, the governor Brian Kemp authorized at least 3,000 National Guard troops ahead of protests expected Sunday. Hundreds arrested across the U.S. Why black and white protesters say they're angry? Let me mention again. White protesters and people of other nationalities, I want to thank you for showing up. We will lead the way, and we need your support. We need your continued support. And I want to thank you again. In many parts of the country's authorities detained protesters who threw projectiles at police or damaged property. But some were outside who weren't even part of the original. But some were outsiders who weren't even part of the original protests. In New York City, 33 officers were injured overnight, including some who were seriously injured. A senior New York NYPD official told CNN. In Dallas, police arrested at least 74 people. In Atlanta, 51 people were arrested Saturday night, and a small crowd remained out past the city's 9 p.m. curfew, police said. Officials in some states have said many are coming just to wreak havoc, okay? There's your provocateurs, there are your instigators. They're coming just to wreak havoc. We have enough sense to know there will not be an armed struggle. Anyone that is promoting an armed struggle is, in this, my humble opinion, a provocateur. Why? Because we cannot win an armed struggle. The struggle is real. All this is happening so we can understand what we must do. We must unite. We must bring back love for ourselves and others, because black lives has to matter to each and every one of us. So all of this is helping us, and our condolences go out to every single black mother and family who have been and are victims of recent victims of murder by the police department. Let's say alleged murder by the police department. That nothing we can do to officials in some states said, as I mentioned, said many were coming to wreak havoc. There's nothing nothing we do to provide justice for Judge Floyd matters to any of these people. They're just out firing upon the National Guard. So just imagine a group of racists getting into the crowd for the struggle for black rights, right? Imagine some racists, and so imagine if they have on paint, and they can look just like us, and so they attack the police. Who are the police going to attack? Because they're going to stick and move. They're going to come in, they're going to create the problem, and then they'll move over to another area. So we must be careful. We must go back to the old way. If you don't have older relatives, if you don't have grandparents, aunties, find someone so you heard of the Green Book? It's in that vernacular. So find out what the old way is so you can keep yourself safe. The CNN analysis found that 80% of the 51 people booked in Minneapolis found about 80% of the 51 people booked in the Minneapolis jail during the 2 days of protests were actually from Minnesota. So you had about 20% of people came in from elsewhere. Data from the Hennepin County Sheriff's Department showed 43 of the 51 accused of rioting, unlawful assembly, burglary, or damage to property and had Minnesota addresses. This is what happened when people have experienced the deadliness of racism, but not all of it through police brutality, but also the kind of deadliness that racism has in policies over and over again, said Reverend William Barber, co-chair of Poor People's Campaign. What we are seeing is public mourning. George Floyd's brother says Trump didn't even give him an opportunity to speak during the call. Americans and public officials have demanded justice against the 4 officers involved in the 46-year-old Floyd's death. All 4 were fired from the Minneapolis Police Department. Okay, great. They all must be charged with murder. Derek Chauvin, the ex-Minneapolis officer seen in a video kneeling on Floyd's neck for almost 9 minutes, was charged Friday with 3rd-degree murder, another insult to us, and 2nd-degree manslaughter, and his bail was set at $500,000. I ask you, if that had been done to a dog, do you think that he would get bailed out? New video posted on social media appears to show 3 Minneapolis police officers, not just Chauvin, kneeling on Floyd during his arrest. Of course, CNN is not able to locate the person who shot the footage. But I want to thank you for providing the footage. These are dangerous times. We must be careful. Cities set curfew and deploy National Guard. Now, back in the 60s, what they do is they let the situation get very bad, then the National Guard comes in and puts everybody on lockdown. So we want to keep our eyes and ears open for provocateurs, people and instigators, people that are trying to advise us to become violent and make unwise decisions. Okay. In Nashville, where a 10 p.m. curfew was set by Mayor John Cooper, declared a state of a civil emergency. Officers used tear gas to disperse a crowd that turned violent. Protesters set Nashville's historic courthouse on fire, according to police, and several businesses were damaged. Again, we don't know who these protesters are. Are they protesting the numerous murders, the ongoing murders of black men in the United States, allegedly by the police department? Or are they there to instigate and put black people under the microscope so that they can be murdered, slaughtered by the National Guard and law enforcement? The crowd was being warned of unlawful assembly, and then they shot gas out, and at least outside of the Metro Courthouse in Nashville. At least 13 states and the District of Columbia have activated the National Guard to respond to unrest. know that the National Guard is always active. And there's a state militia. There will be no armed struggle. Don't even try it. That's signing up for massacre. There's other ways. We must employ the other ways. That's why social justice is intergenerational. Older people don't think that you're the only ones that know. Young people don't think you're the only ones that know. And even younger people don't think you're the only ones that know. It is intergenerational. It's going to take all of us to have social justice. And also those of us of all colors. We had good white folks with us in the 60s, and Asian and brown and others. And that's what we're seeing the resurgence of it again, because every race has experienced racism under Make America Great Again, right? Watching the unsettling video of George Floyd crying out to his mother, grasping for air, made Gwen Carr, the mother of Eric Gardner, relive her son's death. Put in a chokehold by a New York City officer in 2014, Gardner's cry of, remember, I can't breathe, became a symbol of Black Lives Matter protests. We've got to protest and don't stop. It's about continuity. Don't show up for just the press conferences. You got to stay on the back burners. We have too many chiefs and not enough Indians. Let's become Indians. We know the chiefs should be. Let's decide who's going to be the chiefs. Everyone's not going to be. We don't have time for people to jockey for political power. We need those that can do in the position to do. We need those that can appoint in a position to appoint. And we don't need people that look like us worrying about who can help us and who can't. Okay? This is a shared effort. This is a shared pain. This is a shared travesty, because it could happen to me, you, your son, your friend's son, your child, your grandchildren, your nieces, nephews, at any time. No matter what George Floyd did, he wasn't doing anything to threaten them. So why would they kill that young man? Just like they killed my son, Miss Carr said. And you remember the video of Gardner, Mr. Gardner, and he kept saying, I can't breathe, and they killed him before our eyes. I don't condone violence, Miss Carr said, Gardner's mother, but I understand it. She said days later, speaking out about the fires, looting, destruction happening in cities like Atlanta, Denver, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, and on. Protests, some peaceful, others violent, have spread to at least 30 cities nationwide. When something like this happens, you just combust. Everything comes out. There's who amongst us does not know someone that was murdered? There's too many of us that know someone. And we all, you don't have to be the target of racism to be harmed. We all suffer racism vicariously. Vicariously means that we all feel it in our minds, we feel it in our souls. It is like experiencing it mentally. Some people think only black and brown folks, we see them as potential victims, will identify and experience health effects. But we have the data that shows, despite color, if a person is exposed to racism, it hurts them too. It actually hurts all of us. There's no doubt that African American and Latino families carry the biggest burden from systemic racism and police brutality. Black Americans are nearly 3 times more likely than white Americans to be killed by police, and 5 times more likely than white Americans to be killed unarmed. Let me read that again. Black Americans are 5 times more likely to be killed by police than white Americans unarmed, according to Mapping Police Violence Database, who tracked police killings in the U.S. since 2013. Last year's study found 40,000 of the 103 1,710 Black Americans, more than one-third, have been exposed to one or more police killings of unarmed Black Americans in their state of residence in a 3-month period in the survey. A 2018 Pew Research Center report found nearly 4 in 10 Latinos said that they had been called offensive names or experienced discrimination or unfair treatment because they are Hispanic. Feelings of racial discrimination can lead to higher levels of psychological distress, suicidal thoughts, anxiety, depression, and also violence. Children are hit the hardest. Studies that impact vicarious racism on health, especially children's health. Heard Garris says studies observing racism in the media or hearing about it from friends may transmit trauma to children as they imagine their parents, siblings, or even themselves in the place of the target. Folks, we're at a pivotal point. Now's the time for all good people to come to the aid of their country. Now's the time for all good people to come to the aid of their country, other citizens, children, your neighbors, other human beings, and Black people. Excuse me. It's time to speak up and call racism what it is. If, as a human being, you understand that another human being, debased, dehumanized, and not treated like you are just because of the color of their skin, I think it's important to feel something. I think it's important to acknowledge privilege. I think it's important to ask, what am I not doing by being silent that perpetuates this? What am I not doing by my silence that's perpetuating this? Because I see it's getting worse and worse. How do we open the door so that everyone sits at the table? And you know, Diane Wesley Smith, I've always said, if we're not at the table, we're on the menu. But when we look at the White House, we see who's at the table. So we're on the menu. Black boy shot while running. Okay, so how do we open the door so that everyone sits at the table? That's only done when each of us understands that we have the power to do just that. I want to thank you for joining me. The revolution will not be televised. Peace.
Solely giving these monies to the Black community. Defund the police department, and whatever monies Mayor Green decides of what that amount is, which she hasn't said yet, that those monies be given solely to the Black community. And the reason why is because the Black community has been the only ethnicity that has been suffering so bad. 3 reports in 55 years have been studying of Black people, and we are doing worse than we were 55 years ago. When you look at us on a whole, that Black people, we fare lower and worse than immigrants. And that is not to be a discriminatory statement, but that just tells you how black San Franciscans are faring. With the lowest pay, with the first fired, we have the longest probations, we are fired during probation. When you look at the homelessness, we're only about 3% of the population here in San Francisco. We represent over 37 to 40% of the homelessness. When you look at incarceration rates, again, we are 3% of the population, but we represent over 50% of incarcerated peoples in our jails here in San Francisco. When you look at housing, we are suffering from housing. When you look at education, our kids are not graduating. The police are policing them, sending them to jail, juvenile. And so, again, when you look at black lives here in San Francisco, we really have to put our money where our mouth is. And then for me, how the Board of Supervisors is reacting to Black Lives Matter is really not a good fit for them, and they have not did anything really about Black lives or making Black lives better. This current BOS